Mary, just before you start, I want to add a very few words. Since it is now 11:35 and we are supposed to stop by 12:30, if we want to give some room for questions and answers, I would strongly recommend the speakers not to use all of their 10 minutes allotted. I'll try to do my best in order to keep good order for this session. Please.
Okay, well, thanks very much. Thanks very much for your introduction, DJ. I'm based in the Athens office of Norton Rose, and so I'm dealing mainly with Greek ship owners. And as everyone knows, the Greeks still own a significant proportion of the world's ships. And so what's happening in Greece is really, and with the Greek ship owners, is of interest to everyone in shipping. And what the Greeks are doing now is they're starting to invest in new buildings again. Last year, Fairplay reported 2 ships on order from Greek interests. In the first 9 months of this year, they've reported 87. So there's a lot of activity there. And what I thought I'd do today is gallop through some recent cases that I've had and relate them back to shipbuilding contracts. Now, the first thing I wanted to talk briefly about is subcontracting. And the clause you've got up there is the standard clause in the Japanese sale form, which basically says the builder can do anything it wants with subcontracting. It's been a long time since buyers would accept a clause like that. So generally speaking, the buyers want to restrict subcontracting as much as possible, because obviously you don't want to pay Japanese prices and then find out your ship's been built in China. So this clause I put up next is very similar to a clause that was the subject of a dispute, and it's a clause that I negotiated. And what we said at the beginning was that subcontracting was at the builder's discretion and responsibility, but they had to give notice to the buyer, and they also had to get the buyer's written consent to subcontracting outside the shipyard, and they also had to build the entire main hull structure and assemble the vessel in the shipyard in Korea. So the shipyard agreed to all of that and then completely ignored it and decided to subcontract lots of blocks elsewhere. And our clients protested, and the shipyard then said, oh, but this only refers to the main hull structure. What we did was we started arbitration proceedings for a declaration that those blocks couldn't be used, and the builder then caved in, and we got our way, and the ship was built in the yard in Korea. The other factor that you have to bear in mind is also the number of subcontractors that the builder is going to use, because if the builder uses a lot of subcontractors that are far away from the yard, it's going to be really difficult to supervise the build, and it's going to cost a lot more money. And I have another case where the builder is doing just that. My client, the buyer, wants to take the vessel, and he wants to take it quickly. So he's not stopped the build, and he's not seeking a declaration from the arbitration tribunal, but he's going to try and claim that money back. And it's a substantial amount of money, nearly an extra $1 million, to supervise a lot of subcontracted units that are in various places far away from the yard. So, you know, that's another thing to bear in mind. Which brings me on neatly to supervision. Now, supervision is obviously an important right of the buyer, and you might say, well, you know, how can supervision really be the subject of a dispute? But often if a contract is rescinded for delay, the first thing the yard will say is that the delay wasn't our fault, it was the supervision team that caused all the hold-up. How can you avoid that in your contract? Well, it's best to get the thing clear and know exactly where you are. And so I would say try to get notices in your contract if the builder is going to say at any time that there's going to be a delay in the delivery. He has to give notice, say how long and why and all the rest of it, not just in the force majeure clause, but for any delay. Another issue that we're seeing at the moment with supervision is in relation to the Japanese yards. And the Japanese yards, unless they're dealing with buyers that they know very well, at least from Greece, are starting to become extremely diligent in relation to supervision, in that they don't want to have Greek supervisors on site, because you know they've had trouble with them in the past, because you know the Greek supervisors really do their jobs very well, and some might say they're overzealous. So what they do often, the Japanese yards, is they have an agreement with the buyer that the buyer has to appoint a Japanese-speaking supervisor from a company based in Japan. Okay, that's fine, and the buyer might agree to it, but then you've got to ask the question as a lawyer, what happens if the buyer falls out with the supervisor? Do they have no right at all under the contract? probably a reasonable argument they don't have any right to supervise under the contract. So that's something you've got to factor in and put in some wording to deal with that. Liquidated damages, all I'm going to say about liquidated damages is to talk about a couple of cases that we've had recently in China, where the Chinese yards have simply refused to deduct the liquidated damages amount from the final delivery instalment. No reason except that they wanted to have the full final delivery instalment and they wanted more money. I mean, that was it, full stop. How could they do that? They were in a position where they were able actually to blackmail really the buyers, because the ship was late and the refund guarantee expired within a very short period of the delivery of the vessel. And we had advice from Chinese lawyers, and we wouldn't be able to go to the Chinese courts and get an order quickly enough before the refund guarantee expired. So then we're left with trying to get an arbitration in England, and the buyers would have to wait probably for a year or 18 months for a decision of an arbitration tribunal. So the answer here is to make sure that there's a sufficient period of time between the date on which you can rescind the contract and the date on which the refund guarantee expires, because that gives you more time to play with, to negotiate with the yard, to try to go to the Chinese courts. And I'd say that you have to very minimum of 3 months between the date on which you can rescind and the expiry of the refund guarantee. Rescission. What I really want to say about rescission is to draw attention to the difficult position that buyers are in, where they have a vessel or a series of vessels on contract with greenfield sites, so in other words with shipyards that haven't been built, or with risky shipbuilders. What happens is that they've got to pay a lot of money up front, and in the end of the day, okay, they can rescind for delay, but this might be disputed by the yard, and it's going to be a long time before they get the money back. How do you deal with that in the contract? Well, I would say that for greenfield sites, you should tie the instalments not just to something like steel cutting or keel laying, but to real milestones in relation to the yard. And I had a client who did that to great effect. We got in the contract that money wasn't going to be paid over until the yard had actually constructed the skidway and had the large cranes in place at the yard. So at least the amount at risk is not so high. The same goes for risky shipyards in relation to the amount that's built on the vessel. Why give the money over in relation to steel cutting, which is really just a paper exercise, or in relation to keel laying, which often takes place before anyone is really ready to build the vessel? Why not pay money over when a substantial bit of the vessel's been built on the skidway, 500 metric tons, something like that? You can find that shipyards will sometimes agree to that kind of thing, and it's worth negotiating on. Right, final slide, termination for insolvency of the builder. Now, this is a clause that everyone has to have in the shipbuilding contract. You must make sure that if the builder goes into administration or is restructured, the buyer has the ability to terminate the contract. And not only for that, you also have to have a provision in there that if the refund guarantee becomes invalid or the financial position of the refund guarantor bank changes significantly, that the buyer can rescind if they don't get a refund guarantee from a bank that's as good as in as good as a financial position as their bank at the start. That gives the buyer an enormous bargaining chip in times of economic crisis, and our clients have benefited from that clause, a number of them. Right, so you built your ship, cruise ship in this case, and she's sailing away. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Mary. She did.
Thank you very much.